Hi, my name is Jason. Hi, my name is Jason. Today I want to look at the question of why do support groups work? In order to do that, I'm going to take a look at the perspective of Dr. Robert Cialdini. He is a social psychologist who has closely studied the idea of persuasion and how people are persuaded to say yes to the requests of others. In this case, we're looking at the request being stay sober. What is it about a support group that helps people say yes to that request? So I'm going to take a look at this video, which kind of explains a little bit about his research. And I'll be stopping at various points along the way to explain how this relates to the idea of support groups. It starts out silent. If you've ever seen this video, you'll know. You're like, first question, does the sound work?
Researchers have been studying the factors that influence us to say yes to the requests of others for over 60 years, and there can be no doubt that there's a science to how we are persuaded, and a lot of this science is surprising. When making a decision, it would be nice to think that people consider all the available information in order to guide their thinking, but the reality is very often different. In the increasingly overloaded lives we lead, more than ever, we need shortcuts or rules of thumb to guide our decision making. My own research.
All right, I want to stop there. That is a really important point. Let me grab a book here. Thinking Fast. Let me see if you can see that. Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow by Daniel Kahneman. This is a book all about the ways in which we make, when we make decisions, we take shortcuts, and how many times those shortcuts are helpful. Other times, those same shortcuts cause us to make errors in judgment. But the fact is that the human brain is not set up to be able to, put things down in a list and then from that list decide which are the most important things, tally up the pros and cons, and then make a decision based upon that. There's just too much data coming at us. And I want to point out particularly for the person who is overcoming an addiction, they have done something which scientists called overlearning. They have overlearned how to use a substance to the point now that it becomes second nature, and it can appear even compulsive because of how ingrained that learning is to use substances. And so in particular, because of that overlearning, we need to find ways to kind of game the system and push us in the direction of making the decision to stay sober, because our brain circuitry has been rewired to see drugs as the immediate solution to many things because of this process called overlearning. And so we're going to use some automatic thinking to override the automatic thinking when we have a support group. Let's look at this a little bit more.
Research has identified just 6 of these shortcuts as universals that guide human behavior. They are reciprocity, scarcity, authority, consistency, liking, and consensus. Understand.
All right, so just real quickly, to do a bit of name dropping, I took a course from Robert Cialdini, and I was a volunteer briefly in his lab, and I know that he identified these 6 things because he took a sabbatical from being a university professor, and he took every sales course available, from like selling vacuum cleaners door to door to being a used car salesman, selling Xerox copiers. He took them all, and he would work in these professions for a while as well to identify more techniques that people were using to persuade others to say yes to the product they were selling. We're going to try and use these principles to say yes to the idea of sobriety, or at least we're going to look at how a support group, maybe even unintentionally, uses these principles to help the people in the support group say yes to sobriety and no to addiction.
Understanding these shortcuts and employing them in an ethical manner can significantly increase the chances that someone will be persuaded by your request. Let's take a closer look at each in turn.
So, the first universal principle of influence is reciprocity. Simply put, people are obliged to give back to others the form of behavior, gift, or service that they have received first. If a friend invites you to their party, there's an obligation for you to invite them to a future party you are hosting. If a colleague does you a favor, then you owe that colleague a favor. And in the context of a social obligation, people are more likely to say yes to those that they owe. One of the best demonstrations of the principle of reciprocation comes from a series of studies conducted in restaurants. So the last time you visit a restaurant, there's a good chance that the waiter or waitress will have given you a gift, probably at about the same time that they bring your bill. A liqueur perhaps, or a fortune cookie, or perhaps a simple mint. So here's the question. Does the giving of a mint have any influence over how much tip you're going to leave them? Most people will say no, but that mint can make a surprising difference. In the study, giving diners a single mint at the end of their meal typically increased tips by around 3%. Interestingly, if the gift is doubled and 2 mints are provided, tips don't double. They quadruple, a 14% increase in tips. But perhaps most interestingly of all is the fact that if the waiter provides 1 mint, starts to walk away from the table, but pauses, turns back, and says, "For you nice people, here's an extra mint," tips go through the roof. A 23% increase, influenced not by what was given, but how it was given. So the
Let me catch that last little thing he says there.
key to using the principle of reciprocation is to be the first to give and to ensure that what you give is personalized and unexpected.
All right. So I'm not suggesting that in a recovery group or in a support group you're getting mints. But I am suggesting that in a support group you're getting lots of little gifts. People are welcoming you and saying hi to you. They're saying, hey, here's a chair for you. They are sharing their stories, which is a gift. And they're listening to you and accepting you, which is also a gift. There may be free literature there, which is given away. People may freely give you their phone number and say, hey, follow up with me if you're beginning to have cravings. There are tons and tons of little gifts and giveaways. You may not even consider them that, but that's what's actually happening when you go to a support group. This can be super helpful. And you may see, for example, someone might say, hey, want to get a cup of coffee and chat about what's going on? Hey, if you need someone to listen, give me a call. All of these things are gifts in the truest sense of the word. And those gifts that are given to you are then leveraged to help to implicitly say to you, the proper response to this is to keep coming back and to stay sober. So you're giving yourself, you're voluntarily going there and giving yourself a situation in which all of these gifts that are given to you accumulate and help push you toward the act of saying no. They bolster you and make your ability to say no stronger based on this principle called reciprocity. All right, now let's look at the next principle and see how that might be at work in a support group.
The second universal principle of persuasion is scarcity. Simply put, people want more of those things they can have less of. When British Airways announced in 2003 that they would no longer be operating the twice-daily London-New York Concorde flight because it had become uneconomical to run, sales the very next day took off. Notice that nothing had changed about the Concorde itself. It certainly didn't fly any faster, the service didn't suddenly get better, and the airfare didn't drop. It had simply become a scarce resource, and as a result, people wanted it more. So when it comes to effectively persuading others using the scarcity principle, the science is clear. It's not enough simply to tell people about the benefits they'll gain if they choose your products and services. You'll also need to point out what is unique about your proposition and what they stand to lose if they fail to consider your proposal.
All right, so this can be a bit tricky because we want this group to be available to all. We want to remove the barriers to getting in. So how do you access then the principle of scarcity to help persuade yourself to stay sober? And I think the way you do that is that you recognize sobriety itself and the benefits of the sobriety are a scarce commodity. In the same way that you walk into a store and you see rare books, rare vintages of wine, a rare cigar, rare treasures, that you see these changed and these transformed lives as something that is rare and scarce. Secondly, I think you can make aspects of the group salient that are rare and unique. The anonymity of the group, the support that you get at the group, these things can be thought of as rarities, as scarce things that you lose when you go back to using. Also, the number of days that you accumulate can be something that is hard fought for and hard won, and you don't want to lose by giving up and drinking again. The stories of the people there, their transformations, their support for you, their listening to you, all of these things are somewhat rare. We don't find these in our typical conversations. In a normal workplace friendship, we may not share at the level that we share at a support group, and that is rare. And to be reminded of how rare and how precious authenticity and transparency is can be something that keeps you coming back to the group, and something that you now don't want to give up by going back to your old ways and drinking and living in normal society where none of that depth and that exclusive way in which sharing and support happens in a support group is available to you. Those things are only available in the context of a support group where everyone is working toward the same goal. Let's go on and let's look at the next principle of persuasion.
Our third principle of influence is the principle of authority, the idea that people follow the lead of credible, knowledgeable experts. Physiotherapists, for example, are able to persuade more of their patients to comply with recommended exercise programs if they display their medical diplomas on the walls of their consulting rooms. People are more likely to give change for a parking meter to a complete stranger if that requester wears a uniform rather than casual clothes. What the science is telling us is that it's important to signal to others what makes you a credible, knowledgeable authority before you make your influence attempt. Of course, this can present problems. You can hardly go around telling potential customers how brilliant you are, but you can certainly arrange for someone to do it for you. And surprisingly, the science tells us that it doesn't seem to matter if the person who introduces you is not only connected to you, but also likely to prosper from the introduction themselves. One group of real estate agents were able to increase both the number of property appraisals and the number of subsequent contracts that they wrote by arranging for reception staff who answered customer inquiries to first mention their colleagues' credentials and expertise. So, customers interested in letting a property were told, "Lettings? Let me connect you with Sandra, who has over 15 years' experience letting properties in this area."
Brits, it's called rentals, not lettings.
Customers who wanted more information about selling properties were told, "Speak to Peter, our head of sales. He has over 20 years' experience selling properties. I'll put you through now." The impact of this expert introduction led to a 20% rise in the number of appointments and a 15% increase in the number of signed contracts. Not bad for a small change informed from persuasion science that was both ethical and costless to implement.
I think this principle is being used all over in support groups. Whenever you have a professionally bound booklet, the big book in AA, at the end of AA, when you say it works if you work it, the testimonies of people who have been through the program and are now sober, all of those things are adding this expertness and this credibility to the program. So I think one of the ways you can maximize this for yourself is to secure an introduction to somebody who's been sober for 16 years. Talk to that person, has some authority. Find out what they say and follow what they do. Read the literature that's handed out. This stuff contributes to that idea that this is an expert program. It has expertness. I think that the fact that AA was started by a doctor and another person who was pretty high status, I think that adds some credibility to it. The big book itself says over and over again, it talks about its effectiveness and how other things didn't work, and this is the only thing that's helped. Now, that I would have some qualms with that exclusivity, because there are many programs that work, including church and including other types of support groups and small groups, psychotherapy, there's medications. So I would say that they're a little bit overstating their exclusivity, but there's some real wisdom and some real expertness in what they're doing. And when you go to these groups, you can find other people with expertness and authority on the topic in which they are speaking. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next principle.
The next principle is consistency. People like to be consistent with the things they have previously said or done. Consistency is activated by looking for and asking for small initial commitments that can be made. In one famous set of studies, researchers found, rather unsurprisingly, that very few people would be willing to erect an unsightly wooden board on their front lawn to support a Drive Safely campaign in their neighborhood. However, in a similar neighborhood close by, 4 times as many homeowners indicated that they would be willing to erect this unsightly billboard. Why? Because 10 days previously, they had agreed to place a small postcard in the front window of their home that signaled their support for a Drive Safely campaign. That small card was the initial commitment that led to a 400% increase in a much bigger but still consistent change. So, when seeking to influence using the consistency principle, the detective of influence looks for voluntary, active, and public commitments, and ideally gets those commitments in writing. For example, one recent study reduced missed appointments at health centers by 18%, simply by asking the patients rather than the staff to write down appointment details on the future appointment card.
So I think this principle is at work a lot in support groups. Simply going to the support group is a public act. People are seeing that you are committed to this idea of quitting simply by going there. You can increase the power of this principle by writing in your calendar the days that you're going to go. Being willing to speak the first time in a meeting is also a way in which you're making a public commitment to quitting. When you're speaking in the group about all the sickness, the hangover, the job loss, the people who are upset with you, you're publicly declaring all these reasons that you have for quitting. When you recite the Serenity Prayer, when you recite other slogans together with others, all of these things are public commitments to the ideals and the purpose of the group. And these things help cement your commitment. If you want to really utilize this power of persuasion for yourself, I would say write out your reasons for wanting to quit. Share those with people. If you feel it's safe, put it up on social media. Let some of your anonymity go, and let people know, hey, I'm in recovery. and don't keep it a secret. These public commitments help kind of box us in so that we don't step out of that box and go use again. And when we're doing that ourselves, we're making that decision to do it, someone's not doing it for us, that is absolutely ethical and a good thing to do if you want to stay committed to your goals. Let's go ahead and look at the next principle of persuasion.
Is the principle of liking. People prefer to say yes to those that they like. But what causes one person to like another? Persuasion science tells us that there are three important factors. We like people who are similar to us, we like people who pay us compliments, and we like people who cooperate with us towards mutual goals.
I'm going to stop right there. People who are similar to us. You will hear stories very much like your own when you go to a support group. And so you like these people. And when you like them, you're more likely to say yes to the common goal of staying sober. People who pay us compliments. You're going to hear people say, "Great job. How many days do you have sober? Oh, that's awesome. Hey, thanks for sharing in group today. I'm glad that you came today. What you said today really meant something to me." All of these things are compliments coming to us through the group, and that makes us like the group, and then that makes us more likely to do as the group is implicitly asking us, and it's implicitly asking us to stay sober. And then finally, we like people who cooperate with us. Well, we're going to these groups and we're sharing because we're cooperating together towards this goal of sobriety. So those three factors are very much inherent in the group. They increase how much we like the group, and all of that liking increases our commitment to the goal of the group and to the request it's making of us, which is a request we have for ourselves: stay sober. Let's see a little bit more about what they say about this.
As more and more of the interactions that we are having take place online, it might be worth asking whether these factors can be employed effectively in, let's say, online negotiations. In a series of negotiation studies carried out between MBA students at two well-known business schools, some groups were told, "Time is money, get straight down to business." In this group, around 55% were able to come to an agreement. A second group, however, were told, "Before you begin negotiating, exchange some personal information with each other. Identify a similarity you share in common, then begin negotiating." In this group, 90% of them were able to come to successful and agreeable outcomes that were typically worth 18% more to both parties. So to harness this powerful principle of liking, be sure to look for areas of similarity that you share with others and genuine compliments you could give before you get down to business.
So I think this is important, the second piece of this. In a sense then, what they're saying is if you just get down to the business of the meeting, which involves sharing and sharing of personal details, you're sort of missing the point. You're sort of taking this time is money mindset. Those 15 minutes before the group where you're just having a cup of coffee and chatting might be really important. And maybe sharing a little bit about yourself, your work life, things that you like to do that don't involve recovery may actually help improve the effectiveness of the group, because now you're getting to know other people in the group and see even more similarities besides just the addiction and the desire to get sober. This can be an important thing that happens in those 15 minutes before the group, after the group. Maybe going to some of the social things that your support group organizes can be just as helpful as sort of the knuckling down and the getting into the mechanics of a group and the sharing and the learning from the big book and the learning from Celebrate Recovery and Resilient and all these different groups. Some of it might be just getting to know each other as people. Might be very helpful. So let's look at the next principle, which I believe is the sixth and last principle.
The final principle is consensus. Especially when they are uncertain, people will look to the actions and behaviors of others to determine their own. You may have noticed that hotels often place a small card in bathrooms that attempt to persuade guests to reuse their towels and linen. Most do this by drawing a guest's attention to the benefits that reuse can have on environmental protection. It turns out that this is a pretty effective strategy, leading to around 35% compliance. But could there be an even more effective way? Well, it turns out that about 75% of people who check into a hotel for 4 nights or longer will reuse their towels at some point during their stay. So what would happen if we took a lesson from the principle of consensus and simply included that information on the cards and said that 75% of our guests reuse their towels at some time during their stay, so please do so as well. It turns out that when we do this, towel reuse rises by 26%. Now imagine the next time you stay in a hotel, you saw one of these signs. You picked it up and you read the following message. 75% of people who have stayed in this room have reused their towel. What would you think? Well, here's what you might think. I hope they're not the same towels. And like most people, you probably think that this sign will have no influence on your behavior whatsoever. But it turns out that changing just a few words on a sign to honestly point out what comparable previous guests have done was the single most effective message, leading to a 33% increase in reuse. So, the science is telling us that rather than relying on our own ability to persuade others, we can point.
Okay, I just want to point out that this is a real double-edged sword, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second.
To what many others are already doing, especially many similar others.
So there we have it. 6.
All right, so the double-edged sword is this, that if you're going to a group of people who have a similar issue and are trying to overcome that issue, you're surrounding yourself with people who've fallen victim to that issue, and you can pick up their worst habits and traits. This is especially seen with young people and delinquency and substance use. That when you send young people together in a group with other young people who have those issues, they actually make each other worse. Prisons operate like this. Someone goes in, a junior criminal, and after a year in prison, they come out hardened criminal after having been surrounded by people who are criminals. So there's a risk here. Just one more story about this risk. I talked to a man who went with his wife to AA meetings, and he found that as people told their stories, well, I used to hide a bottle in the tank, behind the toilet so no one would see it. Or I did this, or I did that. All the different things they did to keep their drinking secret, but also to keep it available to them. Well, he started seeing her do these things. He was like, it's making her worse. And this is one of the reasons why in support groups, people really warn you not to tell war stories. These glorify the past, but they also teach you that that's kind of normal, and they can give you ideas about how to do these substances and do these things and have these attitudes when and if you have a relapse. The important part of this is to really focus on what we're doing now to get better. The fact that we're all in this together to stay sober. The number of people here who are staying sober. So if you go to a support group and most people are flunking and failing and doing poorly, you might want to leave, because that support group is going to reinforce for you the idea that everybody is flunking and failing. What you want to do is get to a group that's functioning well and where the majority of people are staying sober and doing well, and that peer pressure from that peer group can help you stay sober. As a side note, I would also recommend, this is a good reason to get involved in church, to get involved in a job, to get involved with your family. If your family is a group of people that don't use, you want as many people in your life reinforcing the idea that the average and the typical thing to do is to stay sober. I would say even in a group where you've got people that are doing well and people that are failing, try to identify with the people that are doing well. Try and get into that inner circle. Try and have coffee afterwards with those people. Surround yourself with people that are staying sober, whether it's inside the group or out. That principle does work. It's very powerful, but it can easily flip the other way when you're hanging out with and spending the majority of your time with people who are using or have using attitudes. That can rub off on you too. Let's just see if there's any last little bits of information we can glean from this video.
Scientifically validated principles of persuasion that provide for small, practical, often costless changes that can lead to big differences in your ability to influence and persuade others in an entirely ethical way. They are the secrets from the science of persuasion.
So they're not secret anymore. And my suggestion here is that you're not using them to influence other people. You're harnessing the power of those things to influence yourself to stay sober. And especially at the beginning, you need every little bit of help you can get. They're available. They exist within a support group. And we've talked a little bit about ways that you can purposefully harness their power even a little bit more. I hope this video was helpful to you and that you continue to remain sober. Also, like this video, subscribe to this video, hit the notification button. This helps you get more videos. It also helps the algorithm figure out who to suggest this video to. In the comment section below, share with me any additional ideas you have about how and why support groups work. Hey, if you're liking these videos, please like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. That helps you see more videos. It also helps more people find these videos. And I have a goal to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of this year. I'd really like your help.